Alrighty, everyone. Welcome to another episode of SecCast Live. This is our second episode. Today we have Jack Mannino. He is the CEO of nVisium, well-known web security as well as mobile security expert, trainer, speaker. And Jack, do you mind pulling up the first slide for me? Jack today is going to be discussing, he's basically going to cover Android's Lollipop distro, things to look for. Jack, did you get that slide up yet?
Hang on one second. I might have to unshare and reshare.
Understood. In the meantime, if anyone's having any audio issues or any issues at all with the webinar, feel free to send a message if that's the case. All right, so real briefly, I'll cover nVisium, what we do, and then we'll roll right into the episode. So nVisium performs web and mobile assessments. We perform code remediation, which basically means anything that we find in terms of vulnerabilities, we also fix. We perform training, secure code training, offensive training, everything geared around application security, really code security. And we have auxiliary or ancillary services under the secure development blanket, which is SDLC improvements, gap analysis, threat modeling, DevOps security, whole bunch of things. So if you're interested, please contact us. A couple things. At the end of this presentation, there will be a survey passed out, and I'll remind everyone again at the end of this presentation. Please fill out that survey. It really does help us with curating our content, providing interesting topics, and just keeping the overall quality really high. Additionally, please save all. Actually, so I will answer your questions as best as possible. If I cannot answer your questions, we will save those for Jack at the end of this episode. He will have about a 15 to 20 minute Q&A window. So feel free to pass those questions on. And again, if I can't answer them during this presentation, we'll answer them at the end. Without further ado, Jack, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ken. So today we're going to talk about Android in the context of Android Lollipop. So we're not going to talk about everything Android. We're going to talk about some of the new things in Lollipop that may affect your applications. We're going to talk about some things that affect your applications in a good way, where things are a little bit harder by default. And then we're just going to talk about some new features and functionality that's available that you should just consider using cautiously. So Ken did the introduction for me. I don't really know much else there is to cover. Enjoy digging into new technologies and build some things. Enjoy breaking code every now and then as well. But in terms of interests, I tend to be all over the place sometimes. So today we're going to talk about what's new on Lollipop, both from a security perspective and functionality. We're going to talk about full disk encryption, what's different in Lollipop. We're going to talk about some changes to how permissions work with an emphasis on custom permissions and new permissions open up elsewhere in different functionality within the applications. We'll talk about some of the new ways you can use Android in the workplace, features that enterprises are going to like, and also new modes of operation that extend the functionality for how you can use tablets and phones. And we'll talk a little bit about web views because web views are everywhere, and there's some interesting changes in Lollipop to web views. And we'll save a little bit of time at the end so we can do some Q&A. So what's new in Lollipop? So you'll hear Lollipop called either Android 5, or you'll hear it especially when you're looking at the SDK and different developer documentation as API 21. So there's quite a bit that's changed in Lollipop. A lot of lower level things, as well as higher level APIs and functionality that you can actually call in your applications. One of the big new things that's being touted and advertised quite a bit, and it's pretty cool, is the Smart Unlock functionality. So that allows you to pair up with another device, potentially Android in your car or a smartwatch, and being in a certain proximity of the device allows you to relax your login settings and restrictions and whatnot. So it's pretty interesting. Obviously, some security implications, but don't really know any ways to defeat the technology as of yet. In terms of Bluetooth low energy, so Lollipop introduced a lot of new things to make Android attractive when building connected applications and devices. So in the future, in the next couple months, we're going to do a session exclusively on Bluetooth low energy type of applications and connected devices. So look forward to some of that content in the future. Additionally, from a security perspective, Android Lollipop does quite a few things, from how SE Linux is set in terms of enforcement. It's a lot stricter in Lollipop than it was in devices that ship without Lollipop. Developer APIs, you have a little bit more secure, a little bit more control over some different things, which we'll talk about. And one thing that I definitely like to see is whenever a new version of operating system comes out and different things become secure by default. So Android's done a good job over time of whenever a new version comes out, little by little they make things a little bit harder. They make some more things secure by default. So Lollipop wasn't an exception to that, and they continued that trend. So let's talk about the full disk encryption. So prior to Lollipop, it was available. So full disk encryption support on Android is not new. Difference in Lollipop pretty much puts that devices that ship with Lollipop have that enabled by default. Additionally, basically there's also a key stored inside of hardware-backed storage, which isolates it from the core operating environment that applications operate in, which translates to makes it a little bit harder to extract the keys from that device. So here's just kind of an example of what happens within that process. Found this on the internet. The link is shown below. But pretty much this shows what happens from the time you input your PIN or password to open up the device to how the device actually unlocks your data, and just basically how the whole flow works, including how hardware-based storage interacts as well. So we're going to talk about a few things, new things that have an impact both from a security perspective as well as potentially breaking your applications when you target API 21 and above. So the first up is custom permissions. So in Android, you're allowed to have system permissions. I can actually show an example of an application that has various permissions. So here we have, these are pretty standard permissions, but we can also declare custom permission, for example, and we can name it com.something.else, protection level, and we can set that to be a certain thing. So for example, we could say signature or normal. And what this basically means is that an application wants to request that permission, they would actually need to sign their application with the same key as ours, which would limit the amount of applications that could actually request that. However, you could request a similar permission provided that you sign the application or just simply requesting it, but you couldn't maybe access that application with it. So it changes a little bit inside of Lollipop. So it's on a first come, first served basis. So if your application is the first one that requests that, other applications basically have to honor that and come back with something unique. So this could potentially break your applications. It at least moves the default behavior to a little bit something a little bit sane, in my opinion. And at the same time, this could potentially impact your application. So if you do use custom permissions and you don't have your very unique name and you have it verified based on, there's quite a few different online sources where you can look for different permissions used in applications, so on and so forth. So definitely do your research when you begin targeting API 21 and above to make sure that your permissions are custom and unique. So other new things. So Lollipop introduces quite a bit of new functionality around device management. And there's additional functionality that is made a little bit more standard to push down policies for different app restrictions. So compared to earlier operating systems, might have been a little bit more challenging to do some of these things. In terms of web views, new thing has been introduced in Lollipop where you can actually set permissions on each web view to determine what web APIs can be utilized. So this can include location services, microphone, camera, and other sensitive APIs. You still need to request these permissions. So for example, in the Android manifest, if you didn't actually have the permission in the application, just because you'd be declaring that permission for a web view wouldn't mean that you'd actually have access to it. The manifest file, first and foremost, is what actually dictates what the application's capabilities. And one other note for that is that that's implemented on a per web view basis. So unless you extend every class from the same maybe base class or whatever and utilize the same settings, you may have to look at these on a web view by web view basis just to make sure that you're not, at the same time overexposing what you're actually allowing the application to basically access via scripting. So in terms of functionality that makes them a little bit more attractive, both in an enterprise and a workplace, and just lots more functionality where it gets more interesting than just playing Angry Birds. Is first off is support for multiple users. So this essentially allows you a little bit more control and functionality around how many users can be on a device. So you have a couple different modes. We'll talk about each of these just a little bit. But this essentially makes it easier to have multiple people working from the same device. So a little bit more in terms of segmenting your data off. Another one we'll talk about is screen pinning. So this one's interesting if you want to use a device for a kiosk type of application where you don't want to allow access to the device per se, you just want to allow access to a single screen. It makes it easy to implement this a couple different ways. And we won't talk too much today in terms of the granularity of device management capabilities, but the fact that they've added quite a bit in terms of device administrator, and so there's a little bit more, I guess, of a structure, if you would, of this stuff built into Android. Which is good timing considering the fact that Android devices, both in the personal world and potentially, across the enterprise, are going to explode in terms of just the amount of different devices and technologies that are tied into this ecosystem. So multi-user support. Multi-user support is going to allow you to have multiple users with their own profiles and basically their own, partitioned off or sandbox storage areas for application data. Restricted profiles are, I guess, somewhere in between that and guest mode. Guest mode is at the other side where it allows you to basically whitelist what an app or actual user can do. So by default, if you're operating in guest mode, I believe it's just make phone calls. So this is actually a mode you'll set, within any device you're using settings, or it gives you options to basically just go into guest mode, and you'd have to hit a pin to basically get back out of guest mode. So you can restrict what people are using. Uh, so this might have some, interesting uses in your organization, for how much you can limit, people to, whether you let people use it, just to get on the guest Wi-Fi, or, if you might use it, say, when somebody comes to apply for a job, you might let them use a tablet and do a few things. Definitely some interesting use cases there. Additionally, too, another thing that's interesting, when dealing with like restricted profile, excuse me, when dealing with restricting what users can do within their profiles and functionality, is you could also restrict intent resolution and what capabilities a user can actually utilize. You can actually push these things down as well, which gives you a little bit more control than you would have had in the past natively. So we'll talk about screen pinning. So screen pinning allows you to force a user to stay at a single screen. So an example of this could be if you were allowing people to take, say, their SATs on a tablet. You would basically want them to, maybe just stay within the test. You wouldn't want them to, maybe go into the other application, which maybe lets you administer test scores on the device or something like that. Just an example, but if you wanted to use this, say, in hospitality, so instead of having a big, Windows XP computer from who knows when, maybe perhaps you just give people a tablet. So this allows you to build applications around this. Of course, if you've never hacked a kiosk, I'd suggest you do it. It's a lot of fun. People are always looking for ways to get around applications and kiosks, so finding different ways to be able to jump back to like the main operating system. So there's been a bunch of different ways to be able to do this types of stuff. For example, if you're within a Citrix type application, or different technologies that are used to basically force you into kiosk mode. There's been different ways to, for example, get out of there, call the file system, try to access a shell, and you'd imagine people would do, similar types of things in these applications as well. The application crashes, it might lose the lock, so on and so forth. So definitely cool, but definitely things to think about as well. Another big thing that people use pretty heavily in their applications, that's gotten a lot of modifications in Lollipop, are the web views. So web views can get their own updates now, as opposed to in the past where these were, perhaps at the major operating system revision, or they might get some minor updates, but this actually allows it to pull updates a lot faster, so both functionality updates, new features, security patches. It's definitely a much quicker process. We talked a little bit about web view permissions. I think just over the next couple of years, as we see more web APIs and more functionality that's hooked into web technologies, you'll probably see a lot more use cases for these things, and a lot more functionality exposed. In terms of secure by default behavior, so one that potentially has really the two things here that have the potential to cause some chaos in your applications. Mixed content in web views are now disabled by default. So if your application serves mixed content, before it was set to by default to allow it. So if you're targeting API 21 or above, this is going to be enforced. If you don't target API 21 or above, then it's not enforced and things will work okay. But as soon as you flip that switch and start to aim for that API level, you have to fix this, or your apps aren't going to work well. And honestly, you should, because you shouldn't be serving HTTP and HTTPS content on the same page. So gives you an excuse to fix something you probably should have fixed by now anyway. Additionally, third-party cookies, those aren't going to be installed by default into the cookie manager. So this potentially, lots of applications, developers, they don't vet some of the libraries they maybe use, or some of the third-party solutions they uh, drop into their application. So they might not actually know that some third-party cookies are getting installed anyway. So this might give you an excuse to figure out what's also going on inside your application as well, if you're not doing that already on a daily basis or often enough. Additionally, so weak cipher support is not there anymore, and if you want to utilize weak ciphers, then you'd actually have to create your own custom SSL class to do that, and introduce those capabilities explicitly. It's not there anymore by default. And there's actually quite a few different things they've put into enforce mode for SSL within the WebView and HTTP libraries. Definitely things that were probably overdue, but good changes nonetheless. So if you are looking at web views and you do see set mixed content mode to explicitly allow in 21 and above, you should probably figure out why. I mean, obviously there's going to be cases by where you may not be able to fix that, and you're going to have to allow it, but sometimes you'll find that you can actually keep it secure, and might be easy enough to fix those things. And additionally, whenever you see permissions requested to do different things in the web views, you definitely want to see how those things are exposed. So is that from untrusted user data, that's in a JSON response and it's perhaps loaded into the DOM? Is that taken from, say, an SMS message or some other type of, potentially untrusted input? And just understand how that data comes in and how it potentially impacts your device. So if somebody has a remote way to, flip on a microphone, that's a problem. Or you may find that there's really no way for anybody to get to those types of things because there's, no untrusted input paths, and maybe using a static identifier or something like that, or a static value to set of values to do something. So it's definitely on a case-by-case basis, but you definitely want to investigate these things, because if they do introduce vulnerabilities, then there's potentially high impact outcomes of those. Okay, so that was a pretty quick summary of some of the changes inside of Android Lollipop applications. There's certainly quite a bit more, and I'd encourage you to continue looking into the new edition of Android, as well as future releases, because you'd be amazed at how many different things change from release to release in terms of APIs and whatnot. So thank you guys, and we can basically turn it over for questions now.
Yeah, so as of right now, nobody's written any questions in. I'll leave it open for another minute, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to type those in, and we'll get them answered. Once again, please do not forget that there is going to be a survey immediately after this, the conclusion of this webinar, and there's an email that's automatically sent as well with the survey link. Again, please fill that out so that we can improve the quality of these episodes. Okay, so no questions have been asked. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all wrapped up. Thanks again, everyone. We do plan on hosting another episode next month, and I believe this one will actually have myself covering Rails security, Ruby on Rails security. So we look forward to seeing you there as well. Jack, anything else before I close down this session?
Now, if you guys have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. Be happy to answer anything you guys may have.
All right, everyone. This has been another episode of SecCast. Thanks for watching.